The story of the United States is a story of a vast land. It is a land of tall mountains and wide rivers. It is a land of deep forests and sprawling plains. For centuries this land held countless stories whispered on the winds. Then, new people came, sailing across a great ocean. They came with dreams of freedom, dreams of riches, dreams of a new life. They brought their hopes, their fears, and their ambitions to these shores. This nation, forged in revolution and tested by internal conflict, would grow. It would grow from a thin line of colonies along the Atlantic coast into a continent-spanning power, its journey marked by great triumphs and profound tragedies. The economic journey of America is like a mighty river itself. It began as small streams, little farms, and tiny workshops. These streams joined together, growing stronger and wider. Trade began to flow, first with the native peoples, then across the seas. The land offered much fertile soil for crops, dense forests for timber, and hidden minerals beneath the earth. People worked hard, they cleared land, built homes, and started businesses. They faced many challenges. There were harsh winters and long droughts. There were conflicts over land and resources. Yet, through it all, the idea of opportunity, the chance for a better life, fueled the American spirit and its relentless economic drive. This American experiment was not always easy. It was and remains a complex tapestry woven with threads of liberty and oppression, innovation and exploitation. The promise of prosperity drew millions from every corner of the globe. Each group brought its own skills, its own traditions, its own contributions to the burgeoning economy. They built railroads that stitched the continent together. They worked in factories that churned out goods for a growing nation and a wider world. The pursuit of economic advancement became a central theme in the American narrative, shaping its laws, its society, and its place on the global stage. It is a story of constant change, of reinvention. And so we look back at this history, we look at the people who shaped this land, we look at the ideas that built its economy. From the first canoes on the rivers to the towering skyscrapers of today, America's economic evolution is a powerful tale. It is a tale of ambition, of struggle, of innovation, and of the enduring quest for something more. It tells us not just about the past, but about who we are today, and the challenges and promises that still lie ahead for this nation. Understanding this journey from scattered colonies to a global superpower is to understand a vital part of the human experience itself, a story still unfolding. Long before any European ships touched its shores, America was home to many people. These were the original inhabitants, the Native Americans. They lived across the entire continent from the icy north to the warm south. They were not one single group. They were hundreds of distinct nations, each with its own language, its own customs, and its own way of life. Some, like the Haudenosaunee in the northeast, formed powerful confederacies. Others, like the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, followed the vast herds of bison. Their societies were ancient, their connection to the land profound and deeply spiritual. They understood the rhythms of nature, the changing seasons, the flow of life. These diverse cultures developed complex societies and economies. In the fertile river valleys of the southeast, nations like the Cherokee and Creek cultivated fields of corn, beans, and squash. They built permanent towns, some with large earthen mounds that still stand today as silent witnesses to their past. In the arid southwest, the ancestral Pueblo people, and later the Hopi and Zuni, became master architects. They built incredible cliff dwellings and apartment-like pueblos. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems to grow crops in the desert. Their trade networks stretched for hundreds, even thousands of miles, exchanging goods like pottery, turquoise, and shells. The economies of these First Nations were intricately tied to their environment. They hunted, they fished, they gathered wild plants, and they farmed. They developed tools and technologies perfectly suited to their surroundings. The birchbark canoe of the northern woodlands was a marvel of engineering, light and swift. The travois, pulled by dogs or later horses, helped transport goods across the open plains. Their understanding of agriculture was remarkable. They domesticated plants that would later feed the world. They managed the land in ways that ensured its bounty would continue for future generations, a concept of stewardship often at odds with later European views of resource exploitation. Life for the first peoples was rich with art, ceremony, and storytelling. Their governance systems varied from democratic councils to hereditary chiefdoms. They had deep spiritual beliefs, seeing the sacred in the world around them. The arrival of Europeans would bring unimaginable change. It would bring new diseases, new technologies, and a completely different understanding of land ownership. This encounter would forever alter the destiny of these First Nations and the continent itself. Their story is the foundational chapter of America's economic and social history, a chapter of resilience, adaptation, and enduring presence despite immense pressures. The late 1400s marked a turning point in world history. European explorers, driven by a thirst for new trade routes to Asia, began to venture farther across the Atlantic Ocean. Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, reached the Americas in 1492. This event, often called the Discovery, was in truth an encounter, a collision of worlds. Soon other European powers, England, France, Portugal, and the Netherlands, sent their own explorers and settlers. They were drawn by tales of gold and silver, by the promise of fertile land, and by the desire to expand their empires and spread their Christian faith. Each nation sought to claim a piece of this new world for itself. The early European settlements were small and fragile. Life was incredibly hard for the first colonists. They faced unfamiliar climates, unknown diseases, and the constant challenge of finding food and shelter. Many early colonies, like Jamestown in Virginia, suffered greatly in their initial years. Some failed entirely. The relationship with the Native American populations was complex. Sometimes there was trade and cooperation. Native peoples often taught the newcomers how to cultivate local crops like corn and tobacco, but very often there was conflict. Europeans and Native Americans had vastly different ideas about land ownership, and as more settlers arrived, they pushed further into indigenous territories, leading to wars and displacement. Different European powers established colonies with different economic focuses. The Spanish in the south and west were primarily interested in extracting mineral wealth like gold and silver. They established large agricultural estates, often using forced labor from native populations and later enslaved Africans. The French, mainly in Canada and the Mississippi Valley, focused on the fur trade. They formed extensive networks with Native American tribes, exchanging European goods for valuable animal pelts. The English, along the Atlantic coast, established a variety of colonies. Some in New England were founded by religious dissenters and focused on small farms, fishing, and shipbuilding. The arrival of Europeans brought devastating consequences for Native American populations. Diseases like smallpox and measles, to which they had no immunity, wiped out entire communities, sometimes reducing populations by up to 90%. The competition for resources and land led to continuous warfare. European powers also brought the institution of slavery, forcibly transporting millions of Africans across the Atlantic to work on plantations, particularly in the southern colonies where cash crops like tobacco and later cotton became highly profitable. This brutal system would become a deep and tragic stain on American history, with economic and social consequences that would last for centuries. The English colonies along the Atlantic coast developed distinct regional economies. In New England, the soil was rocky and the growing season short. This made large-scale agriculture difficult, so New Englanders turned to the sea. Fishing, especially for cod, became a vital industry. They also became skilled shipbuilders, using the abundant timber from their forests. Merchants in cities like Boston and Salem engaged in extensive trade, connecting the colonies with England, the West Indies, and even Africa. Small farms still existed, producing food for local consumption, but the maritime economy was the engine of New England's growth, fostering a spirit of enterprise and ingenuity. The middle colonies, including New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, were blessed with more fertile land. They became known as the breadbasket colonies. Farmers grew wheat, corn, and other grains in abundance. These crops were not only used locally but also exported to other colonies and to Europe. Cities like Philadelphia and New York grew rapidly as centers of trade and commerce. These colonies were also more diverse ethnically and religiously than New England. This diversity contributed to a dynamic economic environment, with various groups bringing different skills and business practices, creating a bustling marketplace of goods and ideas. The southern colonies, from Maryland down to Georgia, developed economies based on large-scale agriculture and cash crops. Tobacco was the first major cash crop, especially in Virginia and Maryland. It was labor-intensive and created a huge demand for workers. Initially, indentured servants from England filled this role, but soon, planters turned increasingly to enslaved Africans. Later, rice and indigo became important crops in South Carolina and Georgia. These plantation economies created immense wealth for a small class of large landowners. However, this wealth was built upon the brutal exploitation of enslaved people, creating a deeply unequal society and an economy heavily reliant on forced labor. Trade was the lifeblood of the colonial American economy. The colonies were part of a larger Atlantic trading system often called the triangular trade. Ships carried raw materials like tobacco, sugar, timber, and furs from the Americas to Europe. European factories then turned these materials into manufactured goods, such as textiles, tools, and guns. These goods were then sold back to the colonies, or traded in Africa for enslaved people, who were then transported to the Americas under horrific conditions. This system, while enriching merchants and empires, also reinforced colonial dependence on England and embedded slavery deep within the economic fabric of several colonies, setting the stage for future conflicts. Section 5. A New Nation's Economy, Independence, and Early Growth. The American Revolution, fought from 1775 to 1783, was not just about political independence, it was also about economic freedom. The British government had imposed various taxes and trade restrictions on the colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. Colonists felt these policies stifled their economic growth and were imposed without their consent. No taxation without representation. They wanted to control their own trade, develop their own industries, and manage their own resources. Winning independence meant the new United States could chart its own economic course, free from British mercantilist policies that favored the mother country over its colonial possessions. This was a monumental shift. After the war, the young nation faced significant economic challenges. The war had been costly, and the new government under the Articles of Confederation was weak. It lacked the power to effectively tax or regulate interstate commerce. This led to economic instability, inflation, and disputes between states. Recognizing these problems, leaders like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and George Washington called for a stronger national government. The U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1788, created a federal system with greater powers to manage the economy. Hamilton, as the first Secretary of the Treasury, proposed a bold economic plan to establish national credit, create a national bank, and promote domestic manufacturing. Hamilton's vision aimed to transform the United States from a primarily agricultural nation into a more diversified and powerful economy. He believed in fostering industry and commerce. His plan included protective tariffs to encourage American manufacturing by making imported goods more expensive. He also advocated for federal assumption of state debts incurred during the Revolution, which helped to solidify national unity and creditworthiness. The creation of the first Bank of the United States provided a stable currency and a source of capital for businesses. These policies laid the groundwork for future economic expansion, though they were also controversial, sparking debates between those who favored industrial development and those, like Thomas Jefferson, who championed an agrarian republic. The early years of the Republic also saw westward expansion begin in earnest. The vast lands west of the Appalachian Mountains beckoned settlers. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 under President Thomas Jefferson nearly doubled the size of the country, opening up immense new territories for farming and resource extraction. This westward movement was a key driver of economic growth throughout the 19th century. It provided land for a growing population and new resources for a developing economy. However, this expansion often came at the devastating expense of Native American tribes, who were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, a tragic consequence of the nation's relentless push westward. Section 6. The Age of Iron and Steam, America's Industrial Revolution. The 19th century witnessed a profound transformation in the American economy, the Industrial Revolution. This period saw the rise of factories, new technologies, and mass production. It began slowly in the early 1800s, primarily in New England textile mills. Innovations like Samuel Slater's water-powered spinning machines and Eli Whitney's cotton gin played crucial roles. The cotton gin in particular made cotton production vastly more profitable in the South. This, tragically, increased the demand for enslaved labor, further entrenching slavery, just as the North was beginning to industrialize without it. The nation was developing two distinct economic systems, a division that would eventually lead to terrible conflict. New inventions and technological advancements fueled industrial growth. The development of the steam engine revolutionized transportation and manufacturing. Steamboats chugged up and down rivers carrying goods and people faster than ever before. Railroads began to crisscross the country, connecting distant markets and resources. The telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse, allowed for near instantaneous communication over long distances. These innovations spurred the growth of industries like iron, steel, and coal mining. Factories sprang up in cities, drawing people from rural areas and immigrants from overseas in search of work. This shift from an agrarian society to an industrial one was dramatic and far-reaching. The factory system changed how people worked and lived. Instead of working at their own pace on farms or in small workshops, many people now worked long hours in noisy, often dangerous factories for set wages. Cities grew rapidly, often without adequate planning for housing, sanitation, or public services. This led to overcrowding, pollution, and difficult living conditions for many working-class families. While industrialization created immense wealth and new opportunities for some, it also created new social problems and economic inequalities. Labor movements began to emerge as workers organized to demand better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions, a struggle that would continue for many decades. By the late 1800s, the United States was becoming an industrial powerhouse. Entrepreneurs like Andrew Carnegie in steel, John D. Rockefeller in oil, and Cornelius Vanderbilt in railroads built massive industrial empires. This era, sometimes called the Gilded Age, was marked by incredible economic growth and technological progress. However, it was also a time of stark contrast between the very wealthy industrialists and the impoverished working class. The rise of large corporations and trusts led to concerns about monopolies and their impact on fair competition and consumer prices. The government began to grapple with how to regulate these powerful new economic forces, setting the stage for reforms in the progressive era. Section 7. Shaping a Nation: Presidents and Economic Milestones. Throughout America's history, its presidents have played significant roles in shaping the nation's economic trajectory. George Washington, our first president, set many important precedents. His support for Alexander Hamilton's financial plan was crucial. This plan established the nation's credit, created a national bank, and promoted early industry. Washington understood that a strong economy was essential for the survival and success of the new republic. His leadership helped guide the young country through its formative economic years, laying a foundation for future prosperity and stability, even as debates raged about the best path forward for the new nation's financial health. Thomas Jefferson, the third president, had a different economic vision. He championed an agrarian society of independent yeoman farmers. He was wary of big cities, large industries, and powerful central banks. However, his presidency saw the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. This acquisition of vast western territories dramatically expanded the nation's land and resources. It opened up immense opportunities for agriculture and westward expansion, which became major drivers of economic growth for decades. Jefferson, despite his agrarian ideals, made a decision that profoundly shaped America's future as a continental economic power, providing the space for both farms and, eventually, cities to flourish across a wider domain. Andrew Jackson, president in the 1830s, presented himself as a champion of the common man. He opposed the Second Bank of the United States, viewing it as an institution that favored the wealthy elite and Eastern commercial interests. His bank war led to the demise of the National Bank. This had significant economic consequences, contributing to financial instability in the short term. Jackson's policies also included the forced removal of Native American tribes from their lands in the Southeast, known as the Trail of Tears. This tragic event opened up more land for cotton cultivation and settlement by white Americans, furthering an economy built in part on displacement. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, led the nation through its greatest crisis, the Civil War. The war was fought over slavery, an issue deeply intertwined with the Southern economy. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the Union victory fundamentally reshaped the American economy by ending slavery. During his presidency, Congress also passed landmark economic legislation. The Homestead Act encouraged westward settlement by providing free land to citizens. The Pacific Railway Act authorized the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, which would link the country from east to west, boosting trade and national unity. These measures had a profound and lasting impact on American economic development. Section 8. Trials and Triumphs, the 20th Century and Economic Shifts. The early 20th century saw the United States solidify its position as a global industrial leader. However, this era also brought significant economic challenges. The Roaring Twenties were a time of apparent prosperity, but underlying weaknesses in the economy, such as an overextended stock market and unequal distribution of wealth, were growing. This culminated in the stock market crash of 1929, which triggered the Great Depression. This was the worst economic crisis in American history. Millions lost their jobs, businesses failed, and families struggled to survive. The Depression exposed deep flaws in the economic system and forced a reevaluation of the government's role. President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded to the Great Depression with a series of programs known as the New Deal. These programs aimed to provide relief for the unemployed, recovery for the economy, and reform of the financial system. Initiatives like Social Security provided a safety net for the elderly and unemployed. The Works Progress Administration created jobs by funding public works projects like roads, bridges, and parks. The New Deal significantly expanded the role of the federal government in the economy. It established regulations for banks and the stock market, and it recognized the right of workers to unionize. These changes had a lasting impact on American capitalism. World War II pulled the United States out of the Great Depression. The massive government spending on war production created millions of jobs and revitalized American industry. Factories that had been idle were now running around the clock, producing airplanes, tanks, ships, and munitions. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on jobs previously held by men who had gone to war. This period of intense industrial activity demonstrated the immense productive capacity of the American economy. After the war, the U.S. emerged as the world's dominant economic and military power, its industries intact while much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The post-war decades were a period of sustained economic growth and prosperity for many Americans, often called the Golden Age of American capitalism. The GI Bill helped returning soldiers get an education and buy homes, fueling a housing boom and the growth of suburbs. Mass production techniques perfected during the war were applied to consumer goods, leading to an abundance of affordable cars, appliances, and televisions. The United States led the world in innovation and technological advancement. However, this prosperity was not shared equally, and issues of poverty and racial inequality persisted, leading to the Civil Rights Movement and the War on Poverty in the 1960s, challenging the nation to live up to its ideals. Section 9. The American Ledger, a superpower in the modern world. By the late 20th century and into the 21st, the United States stood as an undeniable economic superpower. Its economy was, and remains, the largest in the world by many measures. It is characterized by technological innovation, a strong entrepreneurial spirit, and vast consumer markets. Industries like software development, biotechnology, aerospace, and entertainment are global leaders. American universities and research institutions attract talent from all over the world, driving further innovation. The US dollar serves as the world's primary reserve currency, reflecting the nation's central role in the global financial system. This position brings both immense influence and significant responsibilities on the world stage. However, the American economy in the 21st century also faces considerable challenges. Globalization, while creating new opportunities, has also led to increased competition and the movement of manufacturing jobs overseas. This has impacted some communities significantly. Issues of income inequality have become more pronounced, with a growing gap between the wealthiest Americans and the rest of the population. The national debt has risen substantially. The costs of healthcare and higher education continue to be major concerns for many families. The economy has also experienced periods of recession, such as the financial crisis of 2008, which required significant government intervention. The digital revolution has profoundly reshaped the American economy. The rise of the internet, e-commerce, and social media has created entirely new industries and transformed existing ones. Companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, and Meta, formerly Facebook, have become global giants, wielding enormous economic and social influence. This technological shift has brought incredible advancements and conveniences, yet it also raises complex questions about data privacy, cybersecurity, the future of work, and the impact of automation on employment. Navigating these changes requires constant adaptation and foresight from policymakers, businesses, and individuals alike, as the very nature of commerce evolves. Today, in 2025, the United States continues to be a dynamic and complex economic entity. It grapples with maintaining its competitive edge in a rapidly changing global landscape. It seeks solutions to domestic challenges like infrastructure renewal and workforce development. The transition to a greener economy, addressing climate change, presents both immense challenges and significant opportunities for innovation and growth. The story of America's economic evolution, from simple colonial bartering to the intricate complexities of the modern globalized market, is far from over. It remains a story of striving, of adapting, and of constantly redefining what it means to pursue prosperity in a land of enduring promise.